What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. And guys, I really apologize for not posting a video last week. I just wanted, honestly, to take a week off, a week break from doing this. There was just a lot of moving parts and a lot of, stuff that I had to take care of last week, so I figured it would be best, rather than me just give a, kind of a terrible effort episode, I'd rather have just postponed it for a week. So we are back on track, and we will continuously be posting videos on a weekly basis from now on, unless something unorthodox happens yet again. But again, I really appreciate you all being patient with me. And this week we got a bunch of good topics to talk about. It might end up being a shorter episode. Again, I'm not entirely sure, but I think we got a good couple topics to talk about today. And as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. And once again, I give all praise, glory, and honor to the one true God, Jesus Christ, who just allows me to do this on a day-to-day basis and is the sole purpose, for me living on this earth. So with that being said, what are we going to get started with today? Well, we're going to jump into the college football playoff and realistically how it's going to turn out, coming, in the upcoming years, basically. So the 12-team playoff ushered in a new era last year, and the format was all off, obviously. The top four teams got byes, but it was the top four highest-rated conference champions, and then it followed suit, in the rankings as the committee deemed necessary. So now, looking forward, one change that was made for the college football playoff this upcoming year is that it will be entering a straight seeding model. So the top four selections, the top four seeds, will not be automatically given to highest rated conference champions, but rather they will be given to the four highest rated teams in college football. That's personally how I think it should have been done last year. And I think on a personal note also, I feel like everybody can get behind that, a straight seeding model rather than just jumping around so many hoops and hurdles. Like if you win your conference champion, if you win your conference championship game, then I think you deserve an automatic bid into the college football playoff. I have no problem with the five highest rated conference champions making the college football playoff. I take issue with the fact that four of the top rated ones will get, automatic buys. So the fact that they are going straight into a, 12-team seeding format, obviously, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the top five college conference champions, in the top 25 will get automatic bids, but it will not be, in fact, directly correlated to one conference champion getting, all four buys, if you get what I'm saying. So I think that's a good thing, not guaranteeing college football, conference champions to get an automatic buy into the college football playoff. Last year we had Boise State get a bye and Arizona State get a bye. Realistically, nobody truly believes that those were two of the top four teams in college football. Oregon, you had an argument for, and Georgia, you had an argument for. But as far as Arizona State and Boise State, I don't think anybody in their right mind believed that those two were considered top four, college football programs in America at that point in time. So now, ushering into a straight seeded 12-team playoff, I feel like that'll just only benefit the sport. But now there's rumors swirling around about the college football playoff expanding in the year 2026, and more than likely it is going to happen, and basically confirm that it will be expanding to 16 teams eventually in the future. So the model that's been talked about recently is a 5+11, model, college football playoff seeding model. So here's basically what it is. This is an article. I'm only going to read the first portion of it, but this is by ESPN's Heather Dinich on May 29th of 2025. And it says this: a 16-team college football playoff model featuring the top 5 conference champions and 11 at-large teams is gaining traction following SEC spring meetings this week, but the next step in the college football playoff expansion from 2026 and beyond will depend on how quickly the sports leaders can make a flurry of decisions. Now, when it comes to those who are making decisions, everybody knows who controls the college football playoff, and everybody knows realistically who's behind the scenes, and that is the Big Ten and the SEC commissioners. I don't know their names off the top of the head, but it is naive to believe that the College Football Playoff Committee is completely in control. You know, when you're dealing with the seeding model that happened last year, and even going forward, you're going to have teams that are biased. You're going to have people on the committee who are biased towards certain conferences, certain teams. I partially believe that that is how some, not all, of the seedings last year ended up. Excuse me. But going forward, you know, I have no problem with 5 of the top-rated conference champions. I have no problem with them getting automatic bids. The problem is going to lie with the 11 at-large teams, because then you get into the debate of, you know, who deserves more of the spots. Is it the Big Ten? Is it the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12? Now, I can tell you right now, it's going to be the ACC and the Big 12 that are going to be the odd men out. They're going to have less of a say, and it's for obvious reasons. The ACC and Big 12, they generate less revenue than SEC football and Big 10 football. It's, you know, it's obvious. You know, all the best football takes place in the Big 10 and the SEC. That is no secret. But the problem is you minimize the effect that other teams can possibly have on the sport and representation in the college football playoff. So if you want to make the argument that, yes, the SEC and the Big Ten have the best schools when it comes to college football programs in the country, I understand that. But there are plenty of teams that were in the Big 12 and in the ACC that I think could have at least, you know, gave a run, you know, gave certain teams from the SEC and the Big Ten a run for their money in the college football playoff last year. So from rumors that I've heard, I don't know if they're confirmed or not, but just things I've been reading, you know, on ESPN, Fox, whether that's, you know, just sports talk shows in general, is that the Big Ten and the SEC are going to want to be guaranteed at least 4 spots in the college football playoff. Guaranteed. So let's go through, in my opinion, the top 4 teams from the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big Ten, I think, has more of an argument. They're the reigning superpower conference. You know, Michigan won the national title in 2023, and Ohio State won it in 2024. So, you know, the past 2 champions are from the Big Ten. So the best teams in the Big Ten, at least in my opinion, you know, the top 4, you can make an argument top 5, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, and then you could probably throw one more, you know, in there, even though they're not going to really do much. And, you know, for sake of argument, the 5th best team in the Big Ten, I don't even know who you can make it. Probably Wisconsin. Okay, we'll just throw Wisconsin in there. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and Oregon, you know, those 4 teams, realistically, I can make an argument that they are in the top 10 in the entirety of college football. You can make, and I'm including Michigan. Michigan, maybe you can exclude just based off their last season. But again, they bulldozed Alabama, you know, twice now in the past 2 years. So you have the Big Ten and their powerhouses. So let's go to the SEC. Who are your top 4 teams in the SEC? You got Georgia, you got Texas, you got Tennessee, and then more than likely Alabama. Well, I don't necessarily believe, and then you got guys in the running like Ole Miss, Auburn, Oklahoma. You got teams like that. I'm sorry, but when you look at as far as being able to be guaranteed spots, we saw what happened when Tennessee was put in a big game against the juggernaut Ohio State. They got absolutely smeared. You had Georgia go up against Notre Dame. They got smeared. Texas was giving it their all against Arizona State. Arizona State realistically should have beat them. there are plenty of, people out there. Paul Feinbaum will always be an SEC homer. That's his network. That is who he works for. I get it. You have to be biased towards that. But going forward, as far as like teams and conferences that need to be guaranteed spots, I'm more willing to be, okay, Big Ten, here's your guaranteed spots. You can have guaranteed 4. If I'm, just the college football playoff committee, if I'm just a fan in general, I'm not willing to give more than 3 spots to the SEC, because if I look at the SEC teams from last year, there was not an SEC team represented in the national championship at all. Big Ten and independent, Notre Dame and Ohio State. And when you look at Ohio State, they pile drove everybody into the ground. Literally everybody. And Notre Dame was the team that gave them the biggest run for their money. But when you look at other teams that, let's say, didn't make the college football playoff last year. One team comes to mind, Miami and Clemson. I feel like those guys, especially even going into this year, because that's realistically, what the argument's supposed to be. I bet you anything that Miami's team now and Clemson's team now would be able to compete with pretty much anybody that the SEC can throw the ACC's way, other than, I would say, Texas. Oklahoma, maybe, because they got a bunch of dudes from the transfer portal that they are going to usher in a new era of Sooner football. Brett Venables is going to have to prove a lot this year to, I think, keep his job. I don't think he's going to get fired this year if they do bad, but he will be on the hot seat. But Oklahoma is going to be back. Texas is good. Georgia and Alabama, they'll still be good, but if you look at teams like from the ACC, if you look at Clemson and you look at Miami, I would be willing to put those 2 teams up against pretty much any team from the SEC, and I think those Miami and Clemson would be able to beat them. So I'm not all for jumping the gun and giving the SEC guaranteed spots, more so than, I'm more okay with giving it to the Big Ten rather than the SEC at this point, just because where's all the sense of entitlement come? The SEC put forth their form. I think it was 3 to 4 teams that made it from the SEC last year. Again, it's escaping my mind a little bit, but all the SEC schools got boat raced out of the college football playoff. They all got used and abused, and straight out of the playoff. So I think going forward in the college football playoff era, I do think 16 teams, I think that'll work. But again, I feel like 14 teams would be enough. But again, they're ushering in a new era. So the five guaranteed conference champions and then the 11 at-large team, the 5+11 model is really gaining traction right now. I think that's a fascinating thing to look at. But again, if you're going to put it all in the hands of the committee, I think that's problematic. Too much power towards the, conference commissioners, and then too much power to the college football playoff committee, and realistically the NCAA as a whole. I think it's too problematic for one aspect and one side to have too much power in this say-so going forward. Okay, now we're going to stay into college football. And we're going to be talking about one of my favorite analysts. We're going to be talking about Joel Klatt. And we're going to be talking about a list that he recently made of his top 10 quarterbacks going into the 2025 college football season. And I got to tell you, some of these guys, I really disagree with. So here's his order right now. Carson Beck at 10. Luke Altmaier from Illinois at 9. 8, Lenore Sellers from South Carolina. 7, DJ Lagway from Florida. 6, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. And then your top 5. At 5, Drew Aller from Penn State. Then at 4, Sam Levitt from Arizona State. Number 3, John Mateer from Oklahoma. Number 2, Arch Manning from Texas, and then number 1, Cade Klubnik from Clemson. So I have a little bit of issue with this. Obviously, Carson Beck at 10, Everybody's going to call me a homer because I'm a Miami fan. But even when you look at Carson Beck compared to a bunch of other quarterbacks on this list, Carson Beck is definitely better than Luke Altmaier. I have no problem with Luke Altmaier being in the top 10. I think he's a fine quarterback and is going to do pretty well, this upcoming year for the Fighting Illini. But to have Luke Altmaier above Carson Beck is absolutely crazy. DJ Lagway hasn't shown enough yet, I feel, to be put up above Carson Beck. And Garrett Nussmeier, I'm sorry, I don't understand what people see in Garrett Nussmeier. The fact that, and here's something that a lot of analysts have been talking about. It's the fact that they said this past quarterback draft, the one with Cam Ward, Shadur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, etc., they said this draft class is far worse than the one upcoming. Now, this isn't necessarily all of them who will be coming out, but some of the top-level quarterbacks that are considered to be top-tier quarterbacks to be drafted this year include Garrett Nussmeier and Drew Aller. I watched Garrett Nussmeier absolutely get torched by a subpar Alabama team where Garrett Nussmeier didn't play good at all, and Jalen Milroe ate them up for 180 rushing yards. And then I look at Drew Aller. How is Drew Aller considered a top 5 quarterback? How on earth do you consider Drew Aller a top 5 quarterback? Drew Aller loses every single big game that he's in. He's still a good quarterback, but as far as like top 5 in the nation, against Ohio State, lost. Against Oregon, lost. It's like every single big game that Drew Aller has to be a part of, he doesn't do anything. I think he's a good quarterback, but do I think he's a top 5 quarterback in college football? Absolutely not. There's other guys that I think are too low. Carson Beck, I think, is too low. I think number 10 is too low. I would have him at least top 6 or 7, at least. And then you look at guys like Lenore Sellers, who was only a freshman last year. He proved more than DJ Lagway. I think he's better than Garrett Nussmeier and Drew Aller. I think Lenore Sellers is being sold very short in this list. I think Lenore Sellers is easily going to be a top 5 quarterback going into this year in college football. South Carolina, despite having 3 losses, was in a prime position to possibly make the college football playoff, especially after beating Clemson at the end of the year. Speaking of Clemson, Cade Klubnik as the number 1 quarterback in college football. I am okay with him being top 5. I am not okay with him being number 1. I think number 1, there's a clear number 1, and it's Arch Manning. Again, maybe people are going to argue the fact that he has not played much, but other people would argue, myself included, that Arch was the best quarterback on the Texas Longhorns roster last year. He just wasn't starting. Everybody and their mother knows that Arch Manning was better than Quinn Ewers. But Quinn Ewers, being a senior and already being proven to be a great quarterback in the SEC and in college football, I had no issues realistically with Arch being his backup because he was a freshman after all. But it was clear as day that Arch Manning was more talented than Quinn Ewers. I've said, Quinn Ewers, I knew he was going to be the starter the whole year, barring any injury, because he was a senior. And he led Texas to the college football playoff, the year prior against Washington. And that was a, shootout, phenomenal game. And that was the 4-team playoff. That wasn't even the 12-team playoff. So Quinn Ewers earned every right to be the starter this year. But it was very apparent, including watching the Ohio State game, Ohio State and Texas in the college football playoff semifinals, it was clear to everybody that if Arch Manning was under center, I don't necessarily believe they would have beat Ohio State, but I will say they would have been in a bit better position to win that football game and possibly win that game. Quinn Ewers made some mistakes that I don't think Arch Manning would have made. I'm okay with Cade Klubnik being in the top 5 of quarterbacks going into this year for college football. I am not okay with him being number 1. John Mateer being from Washington State, coming over to Norman, Oklahoma. I don't have really a problem with him being in the top 5, but I would consider him to be 5. You get what I mean? He's not top, he's top 10, but I think he's more of top 5, but I don't think he's a top 3 quarterback going into this year. So guys that I think are too low, Carson Beck and Lenoris Sellers. I think those two. Carson Beck, we've seen him struggle at times, like the Ole Miss game that comes to mind, and early on against Alabama. I think of those kind of games. But again, I think Carson Beck has enough pedigree, his time playing at Georgia and in college football in general, that I feel like when he is on, he is on. When he is on, he's one of the best quarterbacks in college football. And I think that name deserves some respect, some more respect. I think Carson Beck, personally, again, top 6 or 7. I'm leaning more towards top 6. I think he's definitely better than DJ Lagway, who hasn't really proved much yet because, he was injured. But I do think DJ Lagway is on the up and up. But I think just overall, there's not enough film out there, to really solidify him as that. The only reason I'm saying Arch Manning, I would say, is the number 1 college football quarterback is because there was such a gap, in my opinion, between the talent disparity between Quinn Ewers at starter and then when Arch Manning came in, it was like the offense was completely different. It looked better. It looked rejuvenated. So I feel like Arch Manning at number 1 makes more sense, followed by Cade Klubnik, then John Mateer. Then I'd put Carson Beck. No, then I would put Lenoris Sellers, then DJ Lagway, then Carson Beck. That would be my personal top 6 of college football quarterbacks. So Carson Beck, Lenoris Sellers, I think they're too low. DJ Lagway, Garrett Nussmeier, I think they're properly rated. Again, people saying that he's one of the best quarterbacks, in the draft. I don't necessarily believe I would put any of these guys over like Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart. Again, that's just personal preference. But, Sam Leavitt, he was good for Arizona State. He's good. But again, he's not spectacular. I still think Sam Leavitt deserves some respect on his name. So, I could see Sam Leavitt being a top 5 quarterback, maybe even top 7. I'd give him that. But again, Carson Beck, Lenoris Sellers, those guys are too low in my opinion. And guys like, Drew Aller and top 5, I think that's too high personally. And then Cade Klubnik, I think that's too high. But, he would still be in my top 3 of college football quarterbacks. So otherwise, again, I love Joel Klatt. I think he's one of the best analysts out there. Way better than most of the people who work at ESPN, and honestly, more than most of the people who work at Fox. But I think Joel Klatt's top 10 college football quarterbacks going into this year, I think is a little, just a little out there. One final topic we're going to talk about, and I'm going to kind of loop them in. 2 topics, but I'm going to loop them into one overall topic of the NBA. So after the New York Knicks lost Game 6 to the Indiana Pacers, we have our finals. Game 1 will start on June 5th, Thursday, June 5th, this upcoming week, between the Indiana Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. Again, I think Indiana's a great story. I really do. The Thunder, there's a reason. They only lost 1 East game this year. They only lost against the East 1 time this year. I would not be surprised if the Thunder end up sweeping Indiana. I don't think this is going to be close whatsoever. I do find it fascinating that Indiana and OKC, neither of them have won an NBA Finals yet, so this should be fun. Honestly, very enjoyable. I look forward to seeing a first-time crowned champion in the NBA Finals. It's been so much disparity over the past couple years, but at the same time, there's no household name realistically. Tyrese Halliburton and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, superstars in the NBA, but not like out there notable superstars. Like not like LeBron in his prime, Kobe in his prime, MJ, Magic, Bird, Curry, any of those guys, Tim Duncan. It's like none of those guys, Dirk, in their prime. Like anything like that. And the fact that there's no major market in the NBA Finals, I think this will honestly be the lowest rated and lowest watched NBA Finals other than the COVID years. I think it's just reality because you're trying to appeal to, the masses, not just, not the diehard NBA fans. They're going to watch no matter what. But as like a casual fan like myself, if I wasn't, just into the NBA in general, just liked watching it in general, I wouldn't turn on the TV for this because it's not a household market like a New York, an LA, a Boston, or anything like that. It's small market, and plus you don't have any household name, like superstars like a LeBron in his prime, or Curry, or Luka, or anything like that, or Giannis, or Anthony Davis, and none of those like household names, Kevin Durant, that are in the league currently. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Tyrese Halliburton. We'll see. I'm fascinated by the finals, but I still think it's going to be a boat race for OKC. I think they're going to absolutely bully the Indiana Pacers, probably in 4 or 5 games. And then on top of that, after the Eastern Conference Finals conclude, the long-standing show of NBA on TNT aired their final episode with Ernie, Shaq, Kenny, and Charles. Unfortunately, I do hate the fact that they, TNT lost their, broadcasting rights of the NBA, which is unfortunate. NBC and Amazon Prime are going to be taking over the majority of it alongside, ESPN and ABC. But, there are big changes coming to inside the NBA, which really sucks just because this has been one of the best long-standing, shows on TV for the better part of a decade. And even Charles Barkley doesn't believe he'll be there that long, probably only 2 years. And that's just because of the way ESPN is. And Charles has been very vocal about ESPN over the past, I'd say, 6 or 7 years. One of the things that pops to mind is when he said, you're not going to work me like a dog and not pay me. So, clearly Charles already has some bad blood with ESPN, but going forward, I know he's going to tough it out and be a team player for Shaq, Kenny, and Ernie. So, it's unfortunate to see Inside the NBA on TNT go. It was one of my favorite things to watch, all the time I've spent watching the NBA, and it's just a sad end of an era. And that's going to wrap it up this week on the Lake Show, everyone. Again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want, and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not worth